It is my pleasure to introduce to you both Dave and Rachel from Harmony Biosciences, who are here with us tonight to talk about their phase 3 TEMPO trial. So I'm going to allow you guys to introduce yourselves, tell everybody a little bit about who you are, Harmony Biosciences, and the study. So thank you guys so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you so much, Stacy, Dorothea, everybody that's on the line. It's so great to be with you. I guess this evening, no matter where you are in the US, it's evening at some point. So thank you for taking time out of your busy lives and away from your families to listen to us talk a little bit about the TEMPO trial and what we're working on here at Harmony Biosciences. So you'll see this slide here. This is a very long, fancy name that you'll find on clinicaltrials.gov for the formal name of our study, where we're exploring pitolisant in patients living with Prader-Willi syndrome. We're going to make it really easy for you guys, hopefully. We're going to call this the TEMPO trial. So this is the logo that you'll see on everything. And where we stand today is we are very close to our final protocol. We are very close to opening our first site. And so this is a lot of information that's hot off the presses. Our team has been working really hard and we're really excited to bring this to your community. So Dave and I are going to provide a high-level overview of the trial today, and we are working towards our first site opening by the end of the month. That's this month of March. And then we will continue to open sites all throughout this year. So please stay tuned as we push out information. We'll also work with Stacy, Dorothea, the PWSA team to also share information as we open sites across the US this year. If you don't know who we are at Harmony Biosciences, I'm Rachel Radomski. I'm the head of patient advocacy and engagement. I've had the privilege to work with the PWS community for the last almost 6 years now that I've been at Harmony. You all have become very near and dear to my heart. I've had the pleasure of meeting a number of you at different events. Just got to see some folks at Rare Disease Week in Washington, D.C. At the end of last month. And I'm just so excited to share more information. Harmony Biosciences, we are about a 260 person company now. We're based outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and you'll see our pipeline over here on the right, which is growing, which is exciting. We are exploring pitolisant in a number of rare neurological diseases, and what we're going to talk about today is where I've put the little TEMPO, Prader-Willi syndrome. And one of the most important tenets of what we do at Harmony is keeping patients at the heart of everything we do and infusing empathy along with innovation. So we have worked hard, hopefully, to make this trial as easy for your families and your loved ones as possible. And we're also always open to your feedback. So we'll give you our contact information at the end of this. One of the reasons I'm actually really excited to be here tonight, and we actually asked for this week, if you don't know, it is Sleep Awareness Week. And that is held annually in March, the week that the clocks change. Dave will dive a little bit more into the sleep science on the next slides, but me wearing my advocacy hat, what we do at Harmony and what other advocacy groups and nonprofit organizations do this week is they fly the flag on how promoting better sleep is a way to increase overall health and well-being. I saw Dr. Shelby Harris this morning on the Today Show talking about sleep and sleep health. We also partner with other groups like the National Sleep Foundation, Project Sleep, just to raise awareness, post on social media. So as I said, Dave will dig a little bit into the sleep science, but we are coming to you live this week on Sleep Awareness Week, which is very appropriate for us. Dave, I'll turn it over to you as the senior medical director on this trial, and you can talk a little bit, please, about PWS, pitolisant, and why we're looking at sleep.
Okay, thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Stacy and Dorothea. Good evening to everyone. Happy to be here. As Rachel said, my name is Dave Seiden. Just to give you a little bit of background on who I am, I'm actually a neurologist and a sleep specialist. I spent about 25, almost 30 years as a practitioner, in office practice, and I've been in pharma now about 6 years or so, and I've been with Harmony for about 2 years. And as Rachel said, I'll be the medical lead for this TEMPO trial, which I'm going to tell you about in a moment. But before I do that, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about Prader-Willi syndrome and pitolisant and what we're doing here at Harmony and how these two things sort of fit together. As I'm sure all of you know, Prader-Willi syndrome is essentially a disorder of hypothalamic dysfunction, right? So the hypothalamus is a gland that sits at the base of our brain and controls many physiological functions and is responsible for things like regulation of hunger and satiety, of course, responsible for, in some part, in controlling sleep and wakefulness, is responsible for regulating growth hormone and other endocrine functions, other metabolic functions, as well as control of body temperature. So it's obviously a very important part of the brain. And unfortunately, in patients with Prader-Willi syndrome, there's dysfunction of this particular gland. And as a result, many of the symptoms that Prader-Willi patients experience are a result of this dysfunction, like hyperphagia, like excessive daytime sleepiness, and so on. In terms of the hypothalamus and its regulation of sleep and wakefulness, this is sort of a complex system that involves neurotransmitters in the brain involved in keeping people awake, and it's as well as neurotransmitters that are involved in helping us sleep. And I think of it sort of like a seesaw, where when someone is awake, the sort of neurotransmitters that keep us awake are in higher levels, and the neurotransmitters that cause us to sleep are in low levels. And then the seesaw sort of switches off to the other side, where we're sleeping, and those neurotransmitters that keep us asleep are high, and conversely, the transmitters that keep us awake are low. And it's kind of an interesting system. It's what we call a mutually inhibitory system. So let's say when we're awake and those wake chemicals are active in our brain, they're not only sending wake signals to like the cerebral cortex and other parts of the brain to keep us awake, they're also sending signals to the parts of the brain that are involved in sleep saying, hey, you need to stay off while the wake system is running. And then the opposite occurs when we sleep. So they kind of send these signals back and forth. Two of the main neurotransmitters, among others, that are involved in this system are something called hypocretin. It's also called orexin. Maybe you've heard of that. And the other one is histamine. And these two particular transmitters are involved in promoting and maintaining and stabilizing the waking state. So if you think about it, right, antihistamines, right, when we take an antihistamine, we like to go to sleep. It makes us sleepy. That's because histamine is a wake transmitter. So if you're blocking its effect, you're going to feel sleepy. And that's where pitolisant works. Pitolisant works as what we call a histaminergic. In other words, it promotes increased levels of histamine, which is an important wake-promoting chemical in the brain. And that's where this sort of dovetails into Prader-Willi syndrome, because, of course, as we all know, excessive daytime sleepiness is a significant issue for many people with Prader-Willi syndrome. So next slide. So what we're going to be doing in the TEMPO study is we're going to be looking at pitolisant, and I'll explain the trial to you in a moment. And we're going to be measuring whether or not pitolisant is helping improve excessive daytime sleepiness in people with Prader-Willi syndrome, among other symptoms. So, and I'll go through this in a little more detail. We'll talk about the objectives of the study in a little more detail. I'll talk about some key inclusion and key and selected exclusion criteria, which will determine whether someone will be able to qualify for the trial. And then I'll talk a little bit about the study highlights, sort of operationally, what it'll look like. And then Rachel will kind of close it with showing you where our current clinical sites are residing. So next slide, please. So as I said, the primary objective of this study is to evaluate the impact of pitolisant, right, a histaminergic medication, in treating excessive daytime sleepiness in people with Prader-Willi syndrome. I want to also mention to you, before I go on, pitolisant is already actually on the market, and it's under the name Wakix. And it's on the market now for people with another rare disorder called narcolepsy. So it's been approved for patients with narcolepsy. And in addition to Prader-Willi syndrome, we're very interested in pitolisant and how it may work in other disorders where excessive daytime sleepiness is a prominent feature. So as I said, that's going to be the primary objective, but we are also interested in evaluating whether pitolisant impacts the severity of irritability and temper tantrums, as well as its effect on other disruptive behaviors and hyperphagia. So next slide, please. So these are some of the I just picked a few of the key inclusion criteria. There's a whole sort of laundry list of criteria in order to qualify for the study. But these are sort of the main ones. And that, of course, is if you're male or female, you're allowed in the trial. We're not looking at one gender or the other. You have to have a genetically confirmed diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome. You have to have excessive daytime sleepiness at the screening visit. And we have various assessments that help determine that. And very important, there needs to be a consistent caregiver, generally a parent, but doesn't have to be a parent. As long as it's a consistent person in that person's life and is hopefully or preferably the same person throughout the study. Next slide. Some of the key exclusion criteria are the following. Again, this is just a short list. If you have previously taken pitolisant, you would not be a candidate for the study. And the reasons for that is, as you can imagine, we're trying to be as unbiased as possible here in determining how well pitolisant works in people with Prader-Willi syndrome and daytime sleepiness, but we also need to follow, of course, any potential adverse events that may occur. And people who have already been taking pitolisant would sort of already have a sense of how that drug makes them feel, whether or not they experience side effects, whether or not they got better with the medication. So that would be an exclusion if you'd previously been exposed to pitolisant. The other thing we want to be sure that we're doing is that we're looking for patients whose excessive daytime sleepiness is related to the Prader-Willi syndrome, and not related to another sleep disorder. So, for example, if you've got significant sleep apnea that's causing your sleepiness, as an example, you would not qualify, of course, unless that sleep apnea is adequately controlled. We do allow for that, and that's generally done, through a sleep study. We can determine if that particular condition is actually controlled. Along those lines, I just draw your attention to the box in the lower right. Of course, another potential reason for being sleepy during the day would be someone who's not getting enough sleep at night. And if that's the case, of course, that could confound how well pitolisant works in somebody with Prader-Willi. So, of course, we will want to be sure that patients are getting enough sleep, and that's usually done, through a diary. The other exclusion criteria that are important is, we wouldn't want someone to be participating in another investigational research study. It confounds things. If someone has a side effect from one of those medications, it would be very difficult to determine whether it's pitolisant or the other drug. So you can only participate in one study at a time. And we understand that patients with Prader-Willi syndrome may take other medications. Maybe someone's on a medication for ADHD or for a little bit of mood depression. So there may be other drugs involved here. And we're generally allowing other medications as long as you're on a stable, consistent dose of that medication. So we know where things are at baseline when a person enters in the trial, and as long as those particular medications are stable throughout the trial, that's allowed. But again, there's a longer list here of exclusions that I didn't include here, but I just wanted to sort of give everybody a high level of what we're doing.
And Dave, you mentioned ADHD and maybe some other medications. What about human growth hormone?
Growth hormone's allowed, again, as long as things are stable. But we also understand that growth hormone doses change as children grow. So we do make an exception for that. There's a formula that we've got sort of figured in that as long as the dose doesn't change by a particular percentage at various times, we'll allow that. So we have thought of that, and that is allowed as long as the dose doesn't change significantly. And it generally doesn't anyway. It's usually sort of incremental. There's incremental changes. So that shouldn't be a problem.
Thank you.
Next slide. So just a few study highlights. We'd like to enroll approximately 134 participants, and that number just doesn't sort of pop up out of nowhere. We have our biostatisticians really look into this and determine, how many patients are going to be necessary to get the data that we need. But it's approximately 134 patients. It's a global study. About half will be coming from sites in the United States. The other half will be in various sites across Europe and Australia. So it's a big study. As I mentioned earlier, an active caregiver is required, and the caregiver will be involved in helping make the assessments that will be used to sort of follow the progress of the patient through the study. So it's very important that person is an active participant and closely involved with that person's life. And the overall duration of the study is expected to be approximately 4 to 6 months, with an option to continue on in what's called an open label extension study. Open label means everyone who continues on in that part of the study is getting the real medication. Because I'm going to explain to you in a minute that the first part of the study is what we call a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. And I'll explain that to you in a minute. So we go to the next slide. So here's the study design. There's a 45-day period in which what we call our screening and baseline period, where we want to be sure that all of the eligibility criteria is met. That's where you would be filling in some questionnaires. We would need to take some blood work, do an EKG, things of that nature, fill in the sleep diary. And then we can determine during that 45-day period, it doesn't have to be that long. It could be less than that if we get all the assessments done sooner than that. It doesn't have to be 45 days. But we have up to 45 days to determine that. And then if you qualify, you then are what we call, you're randomized. That's the word that we use, which means you are randomly assigned to either pitolisant or the placebo. No, it's a complete random decision. The doctor at the site makes no determination. We don't, at the pharmaceutical company, we don't know, how that randomization works. But it's just a random decision who's going to get pitolisant and who's going to get placebo. And so everyone, in essence, is blinded. They don't see what they're getting. whether they're on the real medication or placebo. And it'll be done kind of in a 1-to-1 randomization. Half the patients are going to get pitolisant and the other half are going to get placebo. And I'll explain to you a little bit how the dosing will work, because there are several doses of pitolisant that a person may get, but it's determined, that part of the trial is strictly determined by weight. So generally, if you're heavier, you're going to get a higher dose of pitolisant. If you're lighter, you're going to get a lower dose of pitolisant. And then after that 77-day period where we're going to be comparing patients on pitolisant versus the placebo, of course, which is a fake, right? I should mention that. I'm assuming everyone knows what a placebo is. After that part of the trial, you then have the option to enter into the open label extension, where everybody at that point is unblinded. You know what you're getting, and you continue on with pitolisant for approximately a year. If you're so desirous, I mean, that part of the study is optional. Of course, we would like everyone to continue on pitolisant, particularly if they're doing well and tolerating the drug. Why not? So just a little bit more detail about the double-blind part. Once you've done your screening and baseline period, and we're going to then decide, okay, you're going to get pitolisant or placebo, you'll go home, and the following morning when you wake up, you would start taking the dose, because it's given once a day in the morning to kind of help promote wakefulness for the rest of the day. And then during that double-blind treatment period, that 77-day period, you'll be taking the drug once a day in the morning upon awakening. About 3 weeks in, you'll have a telehealth visit, and then a little bit after that, there's a few in-person visits where, again, we'll be doing some of these assessments to see how the medication is working, whether you're getting improvement, not getting improvement, whether you're having any problems with side effects, those sorts of things. And then at the end of that 77-day period, again, as I said, you have the ability to enter into that open label part of the study. If you're not interested in that for whatever reason, there would be a couple of follow-up visits, and we would, close it out at that point. I do want to mention that, what sort of led us here to this point is, I didn't mention this earlier, but we did complete what's called an early phase proof of concept study, where we did enroll some patients, much smaller study, where we enrolled some people with Prader-Willi syndrome to see if we could get some sort of signal whether or not the medication is helping. And yes, we did get a positive signal, and we've presented that data at some medical meetings, and at some point in the near future we'll be publishing a manuscript on that too, on that data. But we certainly have a good sense that looks like the drug was efficacious in that group of patients, and it's given us enough confidence to move study with a larger global trial.
Dave, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what is pitolisant? So when we say, you take your study drug once daily in the morning, can you describe what taking the study drug is like?
Well, taking the study drug it's a pill. It's a very small, easily taken pill that you take in the morning, and it's designed to enhance histamine levels in the brain and therefore promote wakefulness. The pill itself, the way it works, it has different effects at different histamine receptors in the brain, but the overall effect is to increase histamine levels. Yeah, they're very simple to take. It's just you take once a day in the morning, and it's very well tolerated. It has it's an excellent safety profile. I mean, the medication has been on the market for a number of years now. thousands of patients take Pitocin. Maybe some of you in the audience, have a family or friends who have taken Pitocin. And side effects that are experienced are generally mild, may include some headaches. Sometimes people get a little insomnia at night, sometimes some mild nausea, things of that nature, but generally very well tolerated medication. And was that my last slide, Rachel? I think so, right?
I think so. I think all we have left is, so as Dave said, we are working to launch this trial, get it off the ground. This is a snapshot of our anticipated sites. So you'll see we're trying to be as geographically diverse as possible. We will have sites in California, Colorado, Delaware, Illinois, Georgia, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, Texas, and Wisconsin. In some of the bigger states, we'll have more than one site. California will have Northern California, the Los Angeles area, the San Diego area. Texas, we're also spreading around. New York, we will also have 2 sites in New York, closer to New York City, but we'll also be going up into Massachusetts, Boston area with this trial as well. So please stay tuned as we work to open these sites. I wish I could have a full list for you now, but we will be updating clinicaltrials.gov as rapidly as we can as we work to finalize all of our contracts. But again, we will have a site open by the end of the month, and we'll make sure everyone at PWSA and the community is aware of that. And then feel free to reach out to PWSA, who can put you in contact with our team for more information. Myself on the patient engagement or advocacy side. I have wonderful colleagues, Ann and Crystal, on the clinical operations side, and then my wonderful colleague, Dave, who is the medical lead and clinical development for the trial. So Dave and I are happy to take some questions. You can pull the slides down so you can.
Hey, Rachel, if it's helpful, I could go ahead and read off the first question from Lindsay. She's asking, will patients meet eligibility if one of their meds is Provigil or modafinil? I think I'm pronouncing that correct.
Modafinil.
If not,
Modafinil.
Okay.
Yeah.
If not, will a patient qualify if they come off that medication? My 15-year-old only takes 25 milligrams.
Excellent question. I can take that one. You will not have to come off your medication, as we're allowing other wake promoting agents. As long as you're still sleepy, despite taking those agents, and you're on a stable dose of those agents, you can participate in the trial. Of course, as long as all the other criteria are met, but from that wake promoting agent standpoint, that would be allowed.
Thank you. Our next question, if the patient has a narcolepsy diagnosis or with primarily ESD symptoms, is that an exclusion?
So that's an excellent question, not always easy to answer. And the reason I say that is because patients with Prader-Willi syndrome, by virtue of the fact that they have hypothalamic dysfunction, as I mentioned, they can also experience symptoms that can look like narcolepsy. So they may not necessarily have narcolepsy, but they can have what's been called a narcolepsy-like syndrome, or what we call a narcolepsy-like phenotype. In other words, the kinds of symptoms that they're having can look like narcolepsy, even though they may not have true narcolepsy. So the answer to your question is it depends. Now, having said that, there are some unlucky people that may also have true narcolepsy and Prader-Willi syndrome. I think, you can have those two sort of comorbid with each other, but oftentimes it can be tricky to sort of parse out. So I'll be working with of course, with patients who are enrolled in the trial and their physicians, their clinicians, who will be the investigators at the sites, trying to sort of fetter all that out to see who may qualify. So it's not it's not as straightforward as it sounds. Some may qualify, others may not. But as a general rule of thumb, if you have some obvious other clear sleep disorder that's playing a significant role in the patient's daytime sleepiness syndrome, that would be somebody that would not qualify.
Thank you, Dave. Our next question is, what is the age limit? Ashley, do you mean the ages for the entire trial, or the oldest age or the youngest age? I guess you guys can just go ahead and get the entire, yeah.
Yeah, it's 6 and up.
No age limit.
There's no age limit
That's
on, I mean, we expect, of course, that most of the participants will be, children, teenagers, maybe some adults, but not, generally younger adults. That's sort of what we saw in our phase 2 proof of concept study, and we would expect that, to be similar to our phase 3 study.
Perfect. Okay, our next question. Is the patient still eligible if they are on seizure medications?
The answer is possibly. I think we're going to have to look at that closely to determine whether or not, what the history looks like, why they're on those medications. Seizure medications can also sometimes be used for things not related to seizures. But the answer is maybe. It will depend. That will be it. I know I'm equivocating a little bit here because these are not often easy decisions. These are made, once a full history is taken and in conjunction with all of the other inclusion, exclusion criteria, and I'm involved in, consulting with the investigators on these decisions. So.
And that's something that that the family and the patient would dig into with the investigator at the screening visit, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So you would still encourage folks to at least go through the process of seeing if they're eligible to enroll, correct?
Yeah, and often that can be done over the phone. A lot of times these sites have what they call like phone screens, where you don't even have to go into the site. You'll get on the phone with a coordinator at the site, and they'll kind of go through some of the standard questions and determine right off the bat whether or not it's worthwhile going to the site. So it's not like you have to, schlep to the site if you didn't want to. That's typically how it's done,
Okay, great. Thank you. Our next question is pitolisant known to cause anxiety, agitation, or behavioral activation?
Well, we have seen some, there has been some reported anxiety as a side effect. But in terms of, numbers of patients that experience that sort of thing, it's these sort of side effects are on the low side. And, when you do these clinical trials, it's sometimes difficult to sort out whether these kinds of symptoms, if you're in a trial, for example, whether it's related to the underlying medical condition that may be worsening because, let's say, the drug is not working, or maybe someone's on a placebo and the sites don't know that. So hard to determine sometimes, but anxiety has been reported as a side effect, but in generally low numbers.
Well,
And let me mention one other thing, because the word activation was sort of part of that question. Pitolacin is not a stimulant. It's not an amphetamine. And because of that, it's not even a controlled substance. You don't need a special prescription to prescribe pitolisant like you do for any of, or a lot of the ADHD meds. I think most of them require a special prescription. They're controlled. So we think, from our standpoint, that's an advantage. It's an advantage, I think, particularly for practitioners who don't like to prescribe, controlled substances. And I think, so it's, I just wanted to mention that.
And Dave, are we also in the, if I'm remembering correctly, we're also looking at anxiety versus anxiousness in the trial? Like we're looking at aberrant behavior, is that correct?
We're looking at yes. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. We are doing one of the assessments that we're doing in the trials, and some of you may be familiar with this if you've participated in other trials, something called the Aberrant Behavioral Checklist, the ABC. And that goes into some detail about a whole series of various behaviors in different domains, whether it's temper tantrums, anxiety, depression, a whole series of symptoms that we'll be looking at through that questionnaire. So we'll get a very good sense of how this drug is performing.
I have one other that popped into mind. When we, in our inclusion criteria, Dave, we talked about how you have to have a genetically confirmed diagnosis of PWS. That's something that can be also done if you don't already have that as a family, or your loved one doesn't already have that. That can be done at a screening visit, correct?
Yes, it can be. Yeah, I mean, there may be some patients maybe were diagnosed, many years ago, and we can't find or locate, that genetic test. But if we'll be fairly open to that. I mean, if the practitioner, the doctor, can tell us that, hey, listen, this patient, is, I diagnosed this patient Prader-Willi syndrome many years ago. It's well known to me, I mean, that'll be generally acceptable. But as Rachel points out, if it was never done, which probably most patients, I think, would have had this done as part of the standard evaluation, if not all patients, we could do it and confirm it as part of the trial, if necessary. It may not be necessary. I would venture to guess most of the time it probably won't be necessary.
Okay. How does one initiate enroll in the screening process?
Well, once we have all of our sites finalized, you would contact the site that's closest to you, and even if there's not one that's very close, we're going to try to work with the sites to make arrangements to get patients enrolled, even if there needs to be some travel involved in that. But it's very simple. You contact the site that's doing the trial, and as Rachel mentioned, those trial sites will be on clinicaltrials.gov.
And we'll also have a Tempo website that'll be available in the coming weeks, where you will be able to.
And PWSA, every time a site opens, folks will be sending out a notification to the community as well. So just keep a look on social media. Yeah.
So you contact the site, and generally you would go through like I said, a phone screen, sort of a general sense of how things are looking and whether or not that person, that participant would potentially qualify. I mean, no guarantees, of course. And then an appointment would be made to come in for a screening visit. And screening visit, as I said, includes, taking a full history, a physical, determining, or confirming, in this case, generally, that patient has Prader-Willi syndrome, and then has some of the appropriate symptoms that we're studying, primarily significant daytime sleepiness. And there are various assessments that are done to confirm that. We want to be sure that the patient doesn't have any cardiac problems. So we'll do an EKG, draw some blood, just general chemistries and hematology and that sort of thing. And you would then also be given a diary to take home to determine that patients are sleeping at adequate amounts based on their age. And it kind of goes from there. And then we sort of put all that together and decide if the patient qualifies or not. And then they would, start the study if that's the case, as I
So
described.
there is another question in the chat that kind of piggybacks off what you just said, but I'm curious also, how long would an initial visit typically take?
Oh, that's a good question. I would venture, it depends on the site, but generally it's going to take a few hours.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not in
But
and
not
out.
multiple days, right, Dave? It'd be
Oh, no.
you're
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
you visit in a couple of hours.
Yes, we would try to do everything on that one initial screening visit, everything that needs to get done.
Okay.
But it generally takes a few hours. This isn't a visit where you're going to come in 15 minutes in, 15 minutes out.
Okay.
It takes a little time, because we want to be sure that the right patients are coming in for the study. That's of course everyone's advantage. We want
and
patients, families, and everyone else. So yeah.
How long do you anticipate the follow-up visits taking?
Again, I think it also depends. The telehealth visits are pretty brief, probably 15 to 20 minutes, maybe half an hour at most, maybe not even that long. And then the follow-up visits could be certainly not as long as the initial visit, maybe an hour, let's say. But a lot of it really depends on the sites, how many patients they're seeing. You know how it is at any doctor's office. It could be half an hour, it could be an hour. It just depends on how quickly they're moving and how many people are involved in sort of shepherding you through the process at that particular site.
Okay, so
But certainly
patients,
shorter than the initial visit would be the longest visit for sure. And then probably the final visit would also be a little bit more lengthy as we make determination whether you'd want to continue into the open label. But even there, not as long as the initial visit. That screening visit is generally the longest visit.
okay, great.
That one initial visit. Yeah.
For participants that are traveling outside their state or across country a little bit to get to these sites, I believe you mentioned this a little bit. You all are going to be, will you all be covering travel expenses?
Yes. I believe we are going to be covering full expenses reimbursed. And I'm just getting a little message from one of my operational people that says, yes, travel will be covered and expenses reimbursed. Thank you, Crystal. I know you're out there in the
Crystal's out there. Keep
ether
those check.
somewhere.
Okay.
So yes, thank you.
Thank you. What are the symptoms of EDS that would make someone qualify for the study?
Well, there are certain, I don't want to get into specifics on that because we would like to sort of have patients come in and do the assessments and then a determination, would be made at that point. But there are standard assessments that we use to determine sleepiness. It's based on history, it's based on questionnaires, and we put all that together and make a determination as to whether or not the patient will qualify. But we're generally looking at, people who are going to have at least some moderate degree of sleepiness. If it's mild, very occasional sleepiness, that may be a little more questionable, but we'll make these determinations based on an examination and questionnaires.
And I'm also assuming that this will be in the questionnaire and will be talked about at the initial examination. But what would qualify as a little bit of excessive sleepiness? Would that be one nap during the day, 3 naps during the day, falling asleep sitting up? What would that look
It
like?
could be any variation of that theme.
Okay.
It could be in any number of those kinds of things. Excessive naps, falling asleep in inappropriate situations. There's a whole variety of behaviors that we would be looking at to determine if that's the case. Yeah.
Okay. You may have said it, but what is the max number of participants for a site?
Well, I don't think we have set a cap at any particular site. At least not at this stage of the game. It's open to as, for whatever, if the site can put in, or is interested in enrolling a good number of patients, we're going to allow it. It's at this point in time, it's not capped.
Will sites that are in a medical center be only for the patients who see that physician?
I'm not sure I understand that question. Say that again.
So are you talking, Dorothy, about the differences? So there's sort of clinical trial centers that pharmaceutical companies will use, but then there's also academic medical centers, right?
Correct.
So a hospital.
So the sites that we're selecting are sites that have some expertise in Prader-Willi syndrome. Some of those may be freestanding clinical sites, some may be academic sites. It's a mix. But you do have to go to the site that is participating and is officially enrolled as one of our Prader-Willi Tempo sites. In other words, you can't just go to any physician and decide to enroll in the trial. It has to be a site that's been qualified, and the staff has to be trained. It's kind of an extensive sort of assessment that we make on the site to be sure that they're qualified.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? Are sites going to have the ability, or will they have the ability to, perhaps if they are a site that is very well versed in PWS and treating patients, to prioritize the enrollment where their patients would get preferential enrollment? Or
I don't think it makes a difference. I mean, I think they can look, whoever, if someone comes into the site from outside, it's not one of the regular patients. I mean, they could just as easily qualify for the trial as somebody that's already at, part of their site.
Thank you.
That shouldn't be an issue at all.
Great.
I think, because I'm not a doctor, Dave, I think a way I would say it, Dave, you tell me if I'm wrong, you don't have to be a patient of the doctor to go to that site. You don't have to be a regular patient of the doctor. Okay.
Yes, thank you. If I didn't make that clear, yes, that is the case. Yes, I may not have, Yes, that's anyone can, if you qualify, you qualify whether you're a patient of that particular site's doctor or not.
And then I have one other question. As you open sites, will they begin enrolling as soon as that site opens, or are you waiting for a certain number of sites to open before you begin enrollment?
We're going to be opening up. No, as soon as as soon as we can get a site up and running and they get their approval from their institutional review board, the IRB, we want to get this rolling. Some sites may be up and rolling before others. We're working as hard as we can to get them all up and going as quickly as possible. But every site is a little different. Every IRB is a little different. If those of you have participated in trials before, the academic sites tend to have a lot of bureaucracy and takes time. But we're working to get everybody going as quickly as we can. And once that any given site is up and running, they're off to the races.
Right.
Stace, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box. Folks, if you have any other questions that you would like to ask, now is your chance. It looks like you guys did an incredible job.
Yes.
Either that or we put everyone to sleep.
Well, I want to thank you guys both for all that you do for the PWS community, not just this particular trial, but you guys have been incredibly supportive of the community as a whole. And it's really been a pleasure working with you guys. And then in addition, for being here tonight and sharing this information and partnering with us to help you guys get your trial enrolled as fast as possible.
Thank you. And we're going to keep working hard here at Harmony to open sites. I know that that's what we're all working on day in and day out, and we will stay in touch with you as closely as we can. pleasure and a joy to work with your organization and your community. And we're just, really excited. We're excited about Tempo, and we want to keep going.